Hi there, I'm Annie from Mum Life Australia, and you're listening to the Mum Life Australia podcast, where we combine evidence-based information with practical tips to empower, inspire, and support mums. Today's episode of the podcast is all about preparing your child for school, or what is more commonly called school readiness. Our expert guest is Kirsty Gibbs. Kirsty is a mum of 2 girls and the founder of Learning Blocks, the learning hub for parents and children. Although Kirsty began her career as a teacher in 2006, her passion and specialty lies in not just supporting children, but also empowering parents. In this episode of the podcast, we talk about everything from the absolute essentials that your child needs to know before starting school, through to things you can do at home to help your child's development, and of course, where to go if you need professional help. If you can, you might want to grab some pen and paper because this episode is literally jam-packed with information that you're not going to want to miss out on. Hi, Kirsty. It is such a pleasure to have you on the Mum Life Australia podcast. I know we've been waiting a while to have this podcast recorded. Can you tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself?
So I am a mum of 2 gorgeous little girls. One is about to turn 4 and the other one, she's not quite 2, although she acts as if she's also turning 4. She is a little pocket rocket, loves to get messy, to be outside. She's a bit of a wild child. But it works out really well because my 4-year-old is very calm. She's very sensitive, very sweet and caring, and the 2 of them are just best friends and balance each other out really well. So we live on the Gold Coast. So I'm a qualified teacher as well. I started teaching in 2006. I actually went over and taught in England for 3 years and learned a lot. In 2012, I decided that I wanted to do something more than teaching in the classroom. I absolutely love teaching in the classroom. I love working with children. I love having this little group of kids that you get to see every single day. But I just felt, I actually had an experience where I had a few children in one of my classes in particular who just couldn't keep up with the way that we were going in mainstream. So I would sit down with them one-on-one at any chance that I could, and all I had to do was just explain things differently or give them things in a different way, and they would get it. And so I sort of thought, well, I can't do that in the classroom. I can't physically get to every child who's struggling because, you've got about 28 children in your class, and I can't do that every time a child's struggling. So that's when I started Learning Blocks, and we focused on tutoring, so one-on-one tutoring and very small groups of mainly reading groups. So there's a lot of children who sort of are struggling with reading, so we'd get them in and have really hands-on group sessions with those children, and school readiness classes. I've been doing that since 2012, and then this year, just a few months ago actually, I decided that I wanted to basically take what we were doing in our school readiness classes and be able to give that opportunity to other parents and children who can't get to our class.
It's almost a genius idea. It was, as a mum, my girls are almost identical in age to yours. I have 2 girls as well. My oldest has just turned 4 and my youngest is 2. And as a parent without the teaching background, for me the most difficult thing is that I really don't know what I should be doing. And often, like many mums, I have that mum guilt that speaks up and that says that, you should be doing more. And if I see her, my oldest Delilah, out with kids that are of her age, it can be quite difficult because at that age of about 4, they can be very different. Like there seems to me, as somebody who sees very few kids, I mean, I'm not like a school teacher. I don't see a lot of kids, but I have children or friends with children of the same age. And there seems to be a huge spectrum of what children are like at the age of 4. And so as a parent, one of the biggest difficulties for me is really knowing where on that scale does my child sit, and where are my child's weaknesses that I could perhaps strengthen? So I think the fact that you're able to create a product that not only allows parents to understand why children need particular skills, but it also allows parents to help strengthen those skills in children, which I think is really quite a unique way of empowering parents, basically.
When you're looking at if your child is ready for school, there's a few different areas that you have to look at.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about what those areas might be?
If I'm looking at a child and doing an assessment on a child, for example, and to find out if they're ready for school, I look at socially and emotionally, I look at physically as well as intellectually. So it's not just can your child read and write? That means they're ready for school. School readiness is not just about counting to 100. If a child can count to 100, that's great. But if a child can count to 10, they've shown that they can learn the skills of counting, that they can learn those repetition skills, and they've got those listening skills. All you would have to do is sit down and practice a few times. I'm saying a few times, but you know what I mean. You would just be sitting down and practicing, and your child will be able to learn to count to 100. They are not going to start their first year of school expected to be counting to 100 or to 50 or to 30 or anything like that. A lot of children can, and this is not to pressure anyone, but that's just because parents are sort of freaking out and thinking, oh my goodness, my child can only count to 10 and my friend's child can count to 50. We need to get on top of this. That's not something you need to stress about. School readiness is way more than just reading and writing and counting.
So is there a clear national standard or even a state standard as to what children need to be able to do before they're starting school?
Every child is different, just as you said before, but every school is different as well. So a lot of schools won't actually, and some of them aren't allowed to tell you that there are certain things that are required before they start school. So that's probably more so in the public state system. There are some private schools who will say to you, your child needs to do this, 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 and this. Whereas the state schools, you might not have any idea of what your child needs to know, and then you go to the parent evening and you receive a booklet, and it, again, doesn't say your child needs to know these 5 things or these 10 things, but you should be working on these things with your child. And for a lot of parents, they receive that book in October or November and absolutely freak out.
It doesn't make for a very enjoyable summer break, I don't believe.
And the children feel the pressure as well, because you're there thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to teach these things in this space of a month and a half, and the children will feel the pressure, and we don't want that. I mean, we want children to be confident as well as capable when they start school.
But as parents, the lack of clear standard surely makes that a slightly more difficult task, I guess. So as a teacher and a parent yourself, do you have some guidance to give parents about things that you would suggest are really critical for a child who's about to start school?
So there are some things that you definitely need to have, sorted with your child before they start school. And these are probably mostly, some of them are mostly self-care sorts of things. So toileting, they must be able to toilet themselves. So there are some schools that if your child goes to school and has an accident, you will actually be rung and asked to come up to the school and sort it out.
Okay, so toileting is important, obviously basic hygiene. What else?
Reading their own name. That is really important, because obviously their name is on their belongings, so they need to recognise that belongs to them.
What about something as simple as sort of being able to focus on tasks or follow tasks or concentrate? Because for me, that feels like something that my daughter is not quite sort of ready for.
They should be able to follow a minimum of 2 instructions at a time. As a rule, you kind of think, okay, so if my child's 4, then we go 1 less. So we go to 3, they should be able to remember 3 instructions. If my child's 3, we go 1 less to 2. Okay, they should be able to remember 2 instructions.
So can you give us an example of what 2 instructions at a time might look like?
Sure.
So is there a particular way, if we're working on this skill and we know that it's a must, is there a particular way in which we need to phrase it, or a way that teachers phrase instructions that as parents we can try doing at home so that they're actually getting used to it before they actually are in a school environment?
Yeah, so there's not necessarily a way that a teacher will say it, because every single teacher is very different, but a way that you can work on it, and actually a game and a little sneak peek here, but one of the activities in our next box is working on this skill in particular. So it might be if you grab a toy that your child likes and you say, so 2 instructions might be, get your toy and stand at the front door. So there's 2 instructions there. Within the one sentence, they've got to remember both of them. So that sounds very simple, but often if you start to add more things in, your child will only remember the last thing. Not often, but if they're not where we want them to be, they'll forget the first bit and remember the last. So that's obviously something we need to practice. It might be, go upstairs and clean your teeth. So even though it sounds like 2 instructions, this is making it larger. Go upstairs and clean your teeth, then get a book in your bedroom. You can build up, put more information into your instructions, into your directions, and then add in a whole other thing. So it might be, go upstairs to clean your teeth, get a book in your room, and turn the fan on number 2.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's just about giving them different instructions or directions in a single sentence, and obviously making them more complex as the child gets better at following those instructions. Okay, so what are some other musts?
Other musts, they need to be able to open and close their lunchbox and their drink bottle. And this also comes down to, prepping yourself or being proactive yourself. So when you're buying these things, check them. Buy things that they can open themselves, because you're helping to develop their independence, and those activities are also helping to develop their fine motor skills.
And let's be honest, the upside of that is that if your child knows how to open and close their lunchbox and their drink bottle, it's a whole lot less work for us as mums. Okay, so what else?
They need to be able to put on and take off their own shoes. I would not say that they are expected to be able to tie their shoelaces this early. So if your child can't tie their shoelaces this early, then go for Velcro straps if your school allows it. But they will be needing to take their shoes off and on throughout the day for various things, whether it's sport and those sorts of things. When your child starts school, they're also going to be required to do, follow routines and structure. So one of the things that they'll have to do that they might not have had to do before is sit on the carpet or complete an activity. And this means sitting on the carpet, sitting still for a short period of time. So it might be sort of 10 to 15 minutes. And what we can sometimes see is that this is a real challenge for children. So what you can do to help develop this is sit down with your child and do some activities with them. Sit down and read some stories with them and try and get further through the book. So some children are very happy to sit there and read through a whole story. Other children might, after a couple of pages, want to get up and walk away. So that comes back to, you need to make sure you've got something, try and find something that you think that they're going to enjoy, and also ask questions. So you're not just sitting there reading to them the whole time. You actually want to ask them questions to get them engaged in what you're doing. So, it might be finding things within that page. It might be looking at the character. Have a look at the character's face. What do you think they're feeling? And they might say, "Oh, they're feeling sad." And how do you know they're feeling sad? Because they've got a frown and they've got tears running down their face. And then you can continue questioning, saying, "Well, why are they sad?" So then they're actually starting to do some drawing inferences and conclusions from the story that you've been reading. So that extra skills, and those skills are fantastic for the foundations of reading, because when we're reading stories, our our listening skills are also really important, and our comprehension skills as well. So off on a little bit of a tangent there, sorry, but if you can work on, even some activities, I'm not saying that you need to go out and buy books that they sit down and work through activities for 20 minutes or 15 minutes at a time. There are some children who love to do that. That's great, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it might even be sitting down and doing some Play-Doh with your child and building up that period of time so it's a bit longer and longer so that they can control their body to sit still. It will be a little bit different, and for some children a little bit harder when they start school, because they have to sit on a little mat or a little carpet, it's usually a little circle. They've got to sit there with their hands in their lap. They can't touch other children, which often they want to do. They can't get up and walk away. They can't shout out. They have to sit there. They have to listen, and they have to put their hand up when they want to talk. They have to wait till it's their turn. They can't shout out. So they're all things that they're obviously going to learn if they haven't done that before, because the teacher will model it, she or he will explain it and teach them how to do it. But we want to make sure they've been given opportunities to start to develop those skills. So sitting down and focusing on a task for more than 5 minutes, I would suggest, is a good thing to be doing with your child in that year or even 6 months before they start school.
So, Kirsty, if you've got a child who perhaps is struggling with that a little bit, so they might be happy to sit down and do 2 minutes or 3 minutes, what would be the best way to help lengthen that period of time? So you said as a guideline, maybe 5 minutes of sitting down to do the one task. If you've got a child who's struggling with that at the moment, you mentioned one way of doing it, which is to keep asking questions.
Yeah.
But if they're adamant about moving away and they just can't concentrate on the one task for more than three minutes, let's say, would it be best to say introduce a new task? So get them to physically sit down. So limit it and say, okay, you might not do the same task for 5 minutes sitting down, but my main goal right now is for you to just sit for 5 minutes, whether that means we have to do Play-Doh and read a book. Yeah. Or do you just keep working on getting them to just sit and do the one task?
No, I definitely wouldn't, because there's a very fine line, and we have to be careful. We don't want to be forcing children to do things, especially not at this age, because like the example, the scenario I just gave you, when they start school, it's not that we're trying, as teachers, we're not trying to force them to do this, but we are now in formal education. We now have expectations. We now have a fast-paced curriculum we need to get through. So we need them to sit still, listen, pay attention, those sorts of things. So bring it back when they're 3 and 4 years old and we've still got them at home. We don't want to be forcing that on them yet. We still want them to be having fun. We still want them to be enjoying learning, because that's really, really important. I actually think that we should be teaching children that learning is fun. I don't think that we should be tricking them into learning. So if you've got a child who is struggling with that short attention span, don't force it, don't push it. Exactly what you said. Let them maybe even get up and go and have a play. They might not be ready for 5 minutes of sitting down still yet. Try it again. But maybe if you know that 3 minutes is their maximum, just before they get to 3 minutes, do something quite different within the activity. So I'll use the Play-Doh example again. So maybe you've sat down, you're doing Play-Doh, just before it gets to 3 minutes, introduce a new element. So bring something new into your Play-Doh. Maybe you're going to use some matchsticks within your Play-Doh, or maybe you've got some googly eyes and you're going to make some monsters. So bring in something new to re-spark their creativity and keep them engaged for that little bit longer, but don't force them. I wouldn't stress too much, especially if your child's going to school next year and we're really still only in the first half of the year. I still wouldn't be stressed too much now if your child can't sit down and do sort of a 10-minute activity. Still give them the opportunities.
Okay, so you've covered off hygiene, toileting, focus, concentration, following instructions. Is there anything else that you think a child must be ready to do before school?
The only other one that I have on my list of musts is they need to be able to leave their parents. Now, this, I'm not saying that when we drop them off at school the very first day everything's going to be fine and dandy and smiley, happy faces, because a lot of the time it won't be. They have to have had time away from mum and dad before. So some children might start school and they haven't been to daycare, which is, that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Or they haven't been to preschool, or if in Queensland they haven't been to kindy. So that's okay. That's everyone has got their own ideas and preferences on that. But what we need to make sure is that they have had time with other adults and they have had time away from mum and dad, because all of a sudden they're in an environment where mum and dad isn't there for a whole day, which is a long time. They're taking themselves off to the toilet. They're sorting out their lunches, their drink bottle, their belongings within the classroom. At some point, they're going to need to ask for help. So we want them to be confident to talk to an adult, to ask help from an adult. And, if they're in trouble or if something's wrong, they need to be able to be confident enough to go and approach that adult and, inform them of what's happened. So that is important. It's not necessarily about leaving mum on the first day and being super happy. It's just about having had experiences where they are away from mum and dad and had to interact with another adult and get help and ask questions from another adult.
Okay, so if they're the must, what are some things that as a teacher and parent you think that we at home as parents should consider working on or would be in the best interest for our child to be prepared for when they start school?
Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to quickly talk about was language. So language is super important because language can impact their writing and their reading skills. So we need to be talking to our children all the time. We need to be asking them questions all the time. When we're in the car and they are yabbering away in the back seat and we are just so tired of them talking, for them...
You must have been in the car with me.
And every other mum in the world.
Yep.
But we have to... I know it's really hard because I've been there so many times, but we have to stop in those moments and remember that they are asking us these questions because they want to learn. If we can answer their questions whilst they're in the moment of inquiry, then that's super powerful to them because they're going to remember that, they're going to retain that, and that will come back to them later down the track. That's information they now know, that they are that one little bit smarter than they were if we didn't give them that answer and if we didn't go into that conversation with them. But when they start school, they should be able to ask questions. They should be able to recall events in their lives. They should be able to take part in conversations. They should be using their words to assert themselves, to say what they want or what they need. And they'll be speaking in sentences that are, a variety of sentences. So not just simple sentences, I want a drink. They might be, I want a drink because I am thirsty, or can I please have a drink because I left my water bottle at home. So they're using sentences that are much more complex. Yeah. When it comes to reading and writing, like I said before, they need to be able to recognise their own name. What I would then be working on with my child is starting to write their own name with a capital. Now, this is super important. A capital letter at the front, the rest of the letters in lowercase. When we teach our children to write our names, often we teach them in all capitals, but then when they get to school, we're undoing that because that's not how we write. We generally don't write in all capital letters. So it's not, even though it's the easiest way, because they're just forming, and most of the capital letters are formed with just sticks, that's not the way we suggest you teach your child. A capital letter to start, smaller letters for the rest of the name.
Is there a right way to do this with your child? So I think what my daughter has asked me for, and she must have learnt it from somewhere, but she'll say, Mum, can you do the dots? So she wants me to do the dotted outline of her name, and then she'll trace that.
Yeah.
Is that the starting point? And then from there you go to like mirroring. So you write the name and then they have to draw it without any dots. Is that kind of the progression?
That's great. So generally there's a few other skills that we would work on before that. And that is taking a step back and looking at giving them lots of exposure to paintbrushes and pencils and crayons where they're just drawing pictures. So giving them an opportunity to, again, develop those fine motor skills and develop the control of their hand and the pencil. Sure. Because if we give them dotted lines in their name too early, it's going to be far too difficult for them, way too challenging, and they will fail. And children, it can really knock their confidence if we give them things that are too hard too early. So dotted lines is sort of the first thing we do. Then shapes, so they're tracing the dotted lines. Then the next step is they're tracing dotted shapes and very simple shapes. So it might be quite a big triangle, a big square, a big circle. They can start to have a go at doing a circle by themselves. And then once you're seeing that that's progressed quite well and that they're doing that quite easily, then it might even just be the first letter of their name. And then we're sort of going on to the whole name. So I can't sit here and tell you exactly what your child should, where they should be at, because like we said at the start, they're all so different. Between 3 and 5, they are so different. And some 3-year-olds will be ready to trace their names, whereas some 4-year-olds, some other children aren't ready until they're 4. So I guess the things that we need to work on there is looking at their pencil grip, making sure they've got a correct pencil grip, because, again, that's a really hard habit to break.
As parents, how would we know what the right pencil grip is?
I might put up some images and some little prompts because, again, when you Google, there are heaps of different things out there. But I'll put up on my page the correct grip and then just a few little prompts of what to do and what to look for. I'll give you also the ages, because we don't necessarily want a 2-year-old to be holding their pencil correctly. We don't expect them to be holding their pencil correctly because they don't have the muscles yet to be able to do that. So I'll put in there some guidelines as well as what we want at the certain ages. And then, would that be helpful?
That would be fabulous. And what we will do is we will pop that link on the show notes for this episode so that our listeners can pop into the show notes, grab that link and head on over to grab that resource. I think that would be really, really helpful. What about reading? Is there anything in terms of reading that we should be working on, or anything that you think would help our children once they are starting school in terms of reading skills?
When we're looking at reading, the reading skills that we want for a child, we want them to be able to hold a book the right way up. We want them to know where the front cover is. We want them to know the difference between pictures and words. When I say we, I'm saying not schools. Schools are not saying you need to know this, because, like I said before, schools won't say that. But it's nice as a parent as a teacher of the first year of school, when your child comes in and they know these things, they're hitting the ground running. They're super confident. It's super beneficial for them. Some children will recognize some letters or some sounds of the alphabet, especially those in their own name. And they might even be starting to know the letters or the sounds in mum and dad or any siblings that they've got.
Okay, so that's reading. What about maths and counting, arithmetic, that sort of thing?
Counting up to 10. Often children can count more than 10. And again, that's just a rote. That's just counting. If you can do that in something that is everyday life. So we're walking along, you've got stairs in your house, for example, every time you walk up the stairs, count up the stairs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All of a sudden, your 2-year-old will be counting to 15 because you've got 15 stairs in your house. And it doesn't have to be about sitting down. It doesn't have to be a structured activity like that. Recognising the numerals from 1 to 10, using one-to-one correspondence. So that's when, if you've got 5 objects, for example, you touch them and count them at the same time. So your finger is actually touching the object and saying 1, it's touching the object 2, touching the object 3, as opposed to going 1, 2, 3, 4 and you've only touched 1 object, or 1, 2 and you've touched 5 objects. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's really, really important, because that also shows an understanding and a value of number.
What about colours and shapes and that sort of thing, Kirsty?
That's actually something that we probably would be expecting children to come to school knowing their colours and shapes. Some children might be starting to write some numbers and starting to do sorting and classifying. So if you've got, say, a group of marbles, maybe we're putting all the blue ones over there, or the red ones over there, or the green ones over here. So that's classifying and sorting.
So, Kirsty, that covers reading and writing. What about fine motor skills? So I think you suggested that tying shoelaces isn't a must, but are there any other fine motor skills that we could be working on at home at this age?
Well, something you can work on at home with your child is using and holding a pair of scissors correctly. Don't be scared of scissors, okay? At 3 years old, it is quite okay to be sitting down, obviously sitting down. Don't just give it to them and walk away. You'll have a haircut before you know it. But give them their scissors, sit down with them and show them how to hold their scissors, how to hold the paper. It's probably best that when they're holding the paper, if they're new to scissors, you hold the paper with them so you know where their fingers are, so that they're not chopping their fingers underneath, because that's probably, they're not always aware, because as soon as they hold a piece of paper, if you can imagine, they've got their scissors in their right hand, they're holding a piece of paper in their left with the thumb on the top, their fingers underneath. They have no idea now where those fingers underneath have gone. So once they're chopping, they're not even aware that they're about to chop their own fingers. So you need to get your hand around their little fingers just to make sure if it's getting too close.
So, Kirsty, as parents, do you think there's anything we kind of need to keep an eye on, or maybe some red flags that we just need to keep on our radar?
If your child is not able to toilet themselves, if your child has speech fluency problems, if they if they can't be understood by others, if they can't have a conversation, or if they're not playing with other children. So when I say playing with other children, I mean actually interacting with them, not side by side playing. So, if they're playing shops, for example, they're going up and one person's the customer and one person's the shopkeeper. That's playing together. They're having conversations. If they don't pretend during play, so if they don't get that pretend role, if they can't make believe, if they're clumsy, if they aren't drawing simple shapes, if they don't look you in the eye, if they have trouble hearing or seeing things, if they don't understand 2-part commands like we were talking about before, and if they have very challenging behaviour, any of those things there, I would suggest that you do seek advice if your child, and I'm not saying at 3 or 4, I'm saying just if they're about to start school. So I would say even 6 to 4 months before they start school, if those things are still an issue, then you definitely, I would suggest that you are seeking advice for that. So seeing your GP to get a referral to a paediatrician, or seeing the relevant therapist straight away. So if it's speech, seeing a speech therapist. If it's clumsiness, seeing the child physiotherapist.
Is there somewhere that we can go that will look at our child more holistically? So if we feel like there's a couple of different things going on, so it's not just speech, but there's also inability to understand commands, but also lack of fine motor skills, so a whole range where there's not one specific area. Is there somewhere where we can go as like not a one-stop shop, but someone who can say, okay, well, this issue is perhaps a speech issue, so that's something that you should go to a speech for, whereas this is more of a, I don't know, some other issue you should go to an occupational therapist, or is it perhaps just a GP? Would we just go to our doctor and they work through that with us?
Yeah, a GP can definitely do that. The thing is finding, I don't know about you, but I find finding a GP for a child can be very challenging, especially a little child.
Absolutely.
So I would say straight away, if there are any of these concerns, I would definitely be going to go to your GP and get a referral for a paediatrician, because if any of these things are coming up and your child is age appropriate to start school the following year, then you need to get on top of it. So I wouldn't even be worrying about a GP. I'd be going straight to a paediatrician.
I think you mentioned hearing a couple of moments ago. I'm curious, would you actually recommend that all parents have their kids' ears and even maybe their eyes tested before starting school as like a final check off before they start school? Or is that kind of thing not really necessary from a precautionary perspective?
If you are finding, or if anyone sort of raised any concerns, get their ears tested, because ears can also often relate to speech problems, and get their eyes tested from a behavioural optometrist, not just an optometrist. So a behavioural optometrist will actually check the movement of their eyes and the ability to track things, and it's just a bit more than just if your eyes can see an object close or far away.
But that is something that you would only you would only really recommend if you think that there's already some issue. So it's not, you don't think it's necessary from a precautionary point of view?
No, only if you're worried about
Fabulous.
something.
Okay, cool.
Generally, yeah, only if you're worried about something.
I think that pretty much covers off everything. You've really just touched on all aspects, which is incredible. That is just such valuable information, and to hear it from somebody like yourself who really is an expert in this area is just invaluable for parents, I think. Now, I know you spoke a lot in our discussion about ways that parents can incorporate this learning into their everyday life. I think there was that example you gave us about if you're going up and down stairs, then perhaps you might want to count them with your child. But can you just tell us a little bit now about these learning boxes that you're curating for parents of school-age children?
We have got two different types of boxes. So there's the fine motor skills box, which is literally, it's just about developing those fine motor skills. So there's cutting, there's tracing, there's weaving, there's stamping, there's all sorts of different activities in there. Everything you need is in the pack. You just need your own scissors.
And what about the second box? How is that different?
The school readiness is exactly the same. It's a bigger box. It's got more activities in the box, and it covers a variety of areas. So it covers your reading, your writing, fine motor skills, oral and listening skills, so your language skills, some science, some maths, and it's exactly the same. All of the activities are in there. You'll just need your scissors. It's got the parent guide, so with the language prompts, vocabulary, the extra ideas. So every month we have a new theme, and these boxes, they're a subscription which you can cancel. If you're not signed up for 3 months or 12 months, you can just cancel before the cut-off date of each month. It's there. It's all there for you. It takes the guesswork away. It takes away any stress. It takes away, you know, any time you're not spending hours on Pinterest, which is just like the big black hole of time. And you don't need a Mr. Make a cupboard at home. You don't need to go to the shops to buy anything else. It's all there for you. It's all planned for you. It's done for you. And yeah, a new box every month.
And where can we find you, find out more about you, and find out about these brilliant school readiness boxes?
You can jump over to our website. So it's www.learningblockscentre.com.au, and you can order online. So our May boxes are have just gone on sale. So the subscription box is up, and our next month's theme is dinosaurs. So those boxes actually close on the 26th of this month. So if you are keen to get your hands on one of those boxes, then you need to jump on, order that before the 26th of April, and then it will be sent out to you in that very first week of May. And then that's the same process every month. You'll just receive your new box on the first week of every month.
It really just sounds like you found a way to take the time, the money, and stress away from parents who want to, I guess, play a larger role in helping prepare their kids for school. So as a parent myself, I really do appreciate that, and I think it's such an incredible resource for parents. And Kirsty, I can't thank you enough for sharing all your knowledge and tips. I feel like in just this very short chat, I've learnt so much more about what school readiness really means, and I know that our listeners will be the same. So what we'll be doing is we'll be putting everything you spoke about on the show notes for this episode, including that pencil grip resource that you talked about and links to your website and, of course, your social platforms. Thank you so much, Kirsty. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on the Mum Life Australia podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so that was Kirsty Gibbs from Learning Blocks. And my gosh, what a wealth of knowledge she was. I seriously feel like I have learnt so much having listened to her speak, and I feel a little bit more confident as well. Now, don't forget to take a look at the show notes for this episode to grab a link to that pencil grip resource that Kirsty has put together for our listeners. And if you're not already, we'd love for you to join us over in the Mum Life Australia community on Facebook, where, of course, we share a heap of information from our tribe of experts and, of course, our expert podcast guests.